Morning, everyone. Let's take a look at some updates as it relates to the ongoing war between Israel and Hamas. I'm recording this at 9:30 a.m. Central Time on Tuesday, October 24th, 2023. Lot to go over here. So first and foremost, there were a lot of reports last night that U.S. ships were under a significant attack, likely in the Red Sea. So these reports started to come out on some Iranian-aligned militant channels. They showed some old footage of either a Saudi or a Emirati ship under attack from like 2018. That was being shared as evidence that like the USS Carney had been hit and taken out. There may have been additional launches by the Houthis in Yemen last night that were intercepted. Some rumors about that. As of this recording, I haven't seen anything put out by the Defense Department, but it does look like all of the reports about a U.S. ship actually being attacked and hit, potentially sunk, that all appears to not be true at this point. So, not today, Iran. Now, moving into Israeli actions, they say that they struck 400 targets over the last 24 hours inside of Gaza, which raises some questions that I think are interesting to get into here. They say that they were able to attack Hamas gunmen setting up to fire rockets towards Israel, an operational tunnel shaft that Hamas was using to infiltrate Israel, and then major command centers and staging areas that they add were sometimes in mosques. So the questions here that I think are worth considering is how many more targets remain inside of Gaza, right? That area has been absolutely devastated with bombs and missiles over the past few weeks. The idea that there's still 400 targets to strike is interesting, right? They've got to be running out of known targets to hit. And more of this is going to be dynamic targeting as they see Hamas terrorists moving around the battlefield or new intelligence comes out. But the volume of strikes has really not slowed down at all. Another interesting piece here to think about is how the striking in and around mosques will be interpreted in the international community. So the IDF has done a pretty good job, in my opinion, so far, of anytime a mosque is hit in this last 2-week period here, quickly putting out information to say this wasn't a mosque. It was a mosque being used due to its protected status to house terrorist activities. I don't know where the public sentiment's going to go on that long term. You know, are people going to be upset with Israel for striking mosques no matter the region? Or are people going to be upset at Hamas for using some of these protected structures for military activities? You have to wait and see on that. Now, during these Israeli strikes, the IDF put out that they are able to eliminate 5 Hamas leaders. They say that Ibrahim al-Saher was killed. He's the head of the anti-tank missile array of Hamas's Northern Brigade. Moed Abdel Rahman, who's responsible for the training portfolio in Gaza, was removed. Othman Hamdan, the air defense officer, pretty general title there, was killed. Mahmoud al-Rafi, the supply manager in Gaza City, and Hassan Shalouf, the training manager of the air defense system, all were eliminated by Israeli strikes over the past 24 hours. In terms of some additional statistics coming out of the war, moved to Al Jazeera. They put out a graphic here in the last few days saying that between October 7th and 23rd, the total list of casualties, both Israeli and Palestinian, they say, the 1,405 Israelis killed in the last 2.5 weeks. No major change there. I do have some updates on the Palestinian numbers since this graphic came out. According to the Gaza Ministry of Health, again, all of that information coming from them is going to be at the very least vetted by, if not provided by, Hamas, so keep that in mind. They say that 5,791 Palestinians have been killed, so an increase of 700 in the past 24 hours, and 16,297 have been injured or wounded, so another 1,000 wounded. One thing that I thought was worth bringing up when looking at this graphic is how it's presented. Al Jazeera is widely considered to be much more amenable to the Palestinian cause than the Israeli cause here. I think we've seen that already to a degree in some of their reporting. They do at the same time have a lot of coverage of the conflict, so I think it's worth seeing what they have to say from time to time. What was worth noting in this graphic, to me at least, is they called out the women and children that were killed on the Palestinian side, but they left that figure out on the Israeli side. So if you look at this, on the Israeli side, they call out how many Israeli soldiers and police officers were killed. So that number's 364 on or about. That means that over 1,000 were civilians, and many of those were women and children that were brutally murdered on October 7th. That number's missing on the Israeli side. On the Palestinian side, they are not including the Hamas fighters or anybody associated with Hamas, but instead call out the women and children that have been reportedly killed in Gaza. Personally, I think it'd be, we're not going to get this, but it'd be nice to see a full breakdown of all those statistics for everybody. All right, let's make it well known across the board. Shifting over to the hostage situation, again, over 200 are believed to be held by Hamas at this point. A few days ago, they released their first 2 hostages, 2 dual American citizens. And then overnight, 2 more were released. It looks like an 85-year-old and a 79-year-old woman. Realistically, there's probably a couple of reasons they're releasing people at this point. One is to kind of slow or potentially stop an IDF ground invasion of Gaza. Right, the hostages are a major consideration in this piece, and if Hamas continues to slowly release hostages, every couple days, there might be some external pressure, especially from the countries where these hostages come from those governments towards Israel to say, hey, let's give it a chance. Maybe we can get our people out. Hamas released 2, now 2 more. Maybe they'll release more in the coming days. There were reports. It doesn't appear to have come true at this point. Reports of up to 50 being released at one point, but that started to come out about 12 hours ago, and as of recording, there was no more information on that. Now, one of these hostages did do kind of a press conference, went through a bit of an interview, and they had some interesting information that I think is worth sharing. She described just the horrific experience. She's wheelchair bound, of being abducted, strapped to the back of a motorcycle, beaten with sticks, driven across the border into Gaza. And she says when she got into the tunnels, they were similar to a spider web. And she added, quote, a medic and a doctor came, she says. They were put on mattresses. The doctor returned every couple of days, and the medic arranged for medicines. Quote, the treatment towards us was good, she says, describing how the medic treated another of the hostages who was injured. She added, quote, they took care of all of our needs. This must be said to their credit. She repeats, we ate what they did, saying that the treatment for what was made available to the hostages in this tunnel system was the same as what was available to Hamas or any of the Palestinian civilians that might be under there with them. It's a mixed bag here, right? The fact that hostages are taken at all is horrible and tragic, and they need to be released yesterday, 100%. That said, if you're going to get news of how the hostages are being treated, you want this. You want to hear that the hostages are being treated well. Now, this woman talks about being in a group of upwards of 20 or 25, right? So you're talking about just 10% of the total number of hostages. It doesn't mean that everywhere they're being kept are the same conditions. And that doesn't mean that people holding hostages in other areas are necessarily doing the same. But look, this is a little piece of positive news, right? Hamas is a terrorist organization. They've done a lot of really bad things, including on October 7th. The fact that they might be treating some hostages with respect does not make what they did in Israel any better. It does not mean that the IDF should not go in and eradicate Hamas, right? It's just a little bit of positivity that hopefully the 200 or so hostages that are being held right now are not being tortured, not being murdered while in Hamas captivity. One other thing I wanted to sneak in here that I think is worth talking about is that the war in Israel right now has a significantly higher chance of escalation than does the war in Ukraine. Again, right now, that is. It's not to say that the war in Ukraine is at a stalemate or a frozen conflict or anything like that. The outcome is very much still up in the air. I mean, just over the last couple of weeks, Russia kicked off a pretty significant offensive around Avdiivka. They did take some territory and suffered pretty substantial losses in progress. Ukraine continues to strike Russian targets deep behind the front lines with their newly acquired ATACMs, but we generally know what's going to happen in that war day to day. Right? The international community has done a pretty good job, all things considered, of keeping the fighting contained inside of Ukraine. And yes, surprises are surprises, and you don't see them coming, but there's not very many people predicting right now that Russia is going to, say, strike Poland in the next couple of weeks and draw NATO into that conflict. That's very different in the Middle East right now. You've got Israel attacking Hamas in Gaza, trading blows with Hezbollah in Lebanon, striking targets in the West Bank and Syria. You've got Iranian-backed militias attacking U.S. forces in Iraq, Syria, and firing missiles and drones out of Yemen that are being intercepted by U.S. forces in the Red Sea. Every one of those things, most of which are happening every single day, could easily escalate this conflict into a broader regional or global war. It's just the war in Israel right now is very much on a knife's edge, and it's not clear the direction this thing is going to take. Shifting over to external actors, Israel says that they intercepted 2 Hezbollah drones yesterday. That's on the northern border where there's continued concerns of a Hezbollah intervention in this war that could lead to a much broader conflict. In response, Israel says that they attacked 9 total Hezbollah targets, and we have started to see Hezbollah releasing the names of their fighters that have so far been killed since October 7th. I want to say it's north of 30 at this point, Hezbollah fighters killed in engagements with Israel. Additionally, the U.S. put out that they destroyed 2 more drones over U.S. bases or approaching U.S. bases in Syria. These are referred to as loitering-type munitions designed to crash into and detonate when they struck the target. And as mentioned earlier, there have been some assorted reports of additional missiles and or drones being intercepted in the Red Sea by U.S. forces there. Those likely would have been fired from the Iranian-backed Houthis in Yemen. As of this recording, still waiting for additional confirmation on that. And finally, the United States announced that Marine Lieutenant General James Glynn has headed over to advise Israel as they plan and potentially kick off their ground invasion of Gaza. What's significant here is Glynn's experience, right? So the United States does have a fair amount of experience in urban warfare recently. Glynn has been right at the heart of that. So Lieutenant General Glynn deployed to Iraq multiple times. He fought in Fallujah, he fought in Ramadi, and he commanded the Special Operations Joint Task Force Inherent Resolve during the battle against ISIS in Mosul from 2016 to 2017. The reason that last one's important is that a lot of people are looking to the Battle of Mosul to kind of get an idea of what the ground fight could be like inside of Gaza. Now, it's not going to be one for one. There's never going to be a perfect example like that, and Hamas has significantly more tunnels than, say, Islamic State did in Mosul. But in terms of the most recent urban fight with most of the modern technology that Israel has or will go up against in Gaza, it's the Battle of Mosul. So having Lieutenant General Glynn there to advise should be a significant asset for the Israelis. But that's all I got for now. Of course, if interested in national security subjects, be sure to check out the sit rep I put out on Substack. It's in the description below. 7 to 10 of the top national security stories each week, along with podcast recommendations. But thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.